Hi everyone, my name is Jessica Potts and I admin this group, and we are so lucky and honored to have two speakers. We had a original part one of this webinar, and there's 4 parts, so stay tuned for those. Now we're on part 2, which is going to focus on exercise with POTS. So presenting will actually be Jessica, who's a fellow POTS warrior, patient, however you want to call her, and Dr. Dara Lee Lewis. Is it Dara?
Dara? Mm-hmm.
Lee Lewis from Harvard. So, and Jessica is a medical student at Harvard. So she's going to talk to us about exercise, and if you have comments, put them through, and we're going to pick a couple of them at the end, because this video won't be quite as long, so we'll have more time to answer a couple questions. So if you can see this, we can see 21 people are here, so if you are wanting to comment, go ahead and do that, and I'll be filtering through those. And I'll turn it over to both of you guys.
Hi everyone, really excited to be here today talking about exercise. Within POTS, exercise is definitely one of the #1 recommendations, but also probably the hardest thing to truly implement into your life. And so hopefully today's session will give some practical information on ways to build exercise into your life and help us understand why exercise is so important for us. Dr. Lee Lewis, is there anything else you wanted to add before I get started?
No, we'll wait for the questions at the end, but we're excited to see this presentation.
Awesome. So I will go ahead and share my screen. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so this is part 2, which is exercise and POTS. And so if you missed our part 1, which was about introduction to POTS and kind of an overview of POTS that Dr. Lee Lewis led last week or 2 weeks ago, there is a YouTube video with that information that gives a really broad overview of POTS. And today we're going to zoom in more onto the topic of exercise. And then in 2 weeks, we're going to do a session kind of overall about living with POTS, accommodations, and other symptoms that people typically have with POTS. And the last part will be about SALT compression and a sick day plan. So today we're going to really try to focus on exercise and make the questions really centered around exercise and anything you want to know about it. So I'm sure it's no surprise to you all to hear that exercise is really a central aspect of treatment for POTS, and a lot of physicians believe that it's really the #1 thing to do for POTS. And when you look into the scientific literature that's been published about POTS, exercise is really among the best studied and has shown among the best results for treating POTS. There's really nothing else like it when it comes to medication or other treatments that show really vast improvements in POTS. And kind of the overall idea of exercise with POTS is that you're going to begin with reclining exercises if you're not someone who is able to be upright yet, and you're going to build up that exercise tolerance over time, that no matter where you're starting from, you can build yourself up to a good place. And the thing with exercise that is really frustrating and really hard is that often you're going to feel worse before you feel better. And I think it's really important to know this and to really accept that just because exercising in the short term might make you feel a little bit worse, it doesn't mean that you should stop exercising or that you're doing it wrong. That is actually part of the recovery. And the goal is to eventually exercise 5 to 7 days a week. But I say everything that I say here and throughout the session with the caveat that everyone has specific needs and has their own body. And so while exercise is really helpful for most people with POTS, there are some people who aren't able to exercise for one reason or the other. And if that's a conversation that you've had with your personal physician, then you should rely on the advice that they've been giving you, kind of general advice that is true for many patients with POTS, but of course it's not going to be true for everyone. So why should we exercise with POTS? As we talked about last week, there's a lot of different things that lead to a body having POTS, many different changes that happen in the body. But one of the biggest things is cardiovascular deconditioning. So what that means is that the heart, cardio, and vascular blood vessels become deconditioned over time, and they aren't able to adjust to gravity in the same way. And they've shown that people who, for example, go to space or who have a significant illness where they're bedbound for many months will then develop a POTS-like syndrome because their heart and their blood vessels aren't adjusted to being upright again, and you have to retrain your body to be in that place. And so exercise is really a key way to retrain your body to be upright and to be able to walk around and participate in life more. And so it addresses a few different factors. One is cardiac atrophy, which means that the heart muscle becomes weaker and is not able to pump as well. And so exercise is going to help increase that heart muscle and make it stronger and more efficient so that you can have more of a stroke volume, which means that your heart is able to pump more blood with each beat. And then hypovolemia means low blood volume, so you don't have as much circulating blood. And exercise training also helps increase blood volume over time. So it really addresses these two key factors that end up leading to POTS symptoms in the end. So I'm going to go through a few studies now to talk about some of the evidence for exercise and POTS. So many of you know Dr. Ben Levine, who's down in Texas, and he has done a lot of excellent research around exercise and POTS and has developed the Levine or Dallas protocol for exercise and has really tested it across a variety of settings. And I thought that this study that he did was one of the most convincing, where he had his exercise protocol, which we'll go through in a few minutes, be distributed to people in a community setting. So they weren't coming in to exercise every day. They were doing this at their physician's office for patients with POTS. And they showed really excellent results for the people who were able to complete the exercise training. So after completing the exercise training, 71% of the patients actually no longer qualified as having POTS. So their orthostatics, their vital signs changed in such a way that they didn't have that extreme jump in heart rate that would make them be diagnosed with POTS if they were coming in for the first time. So these patients had an improvement in heart rate change with standing, so they didn't have that rapid jump in heart rate with standing. Most importantly, there was an improvement in quality of life in all of the patients. And so this is quality of life they measure through studies asking questions about how people are able to participate in their daily life and how they feel debilitated or not debilitated by their illness. And so having an improvement in quality of life, I think, is one of the most important measures of whether or not a treatment is working. And the fact that all patients had an improvement of quality of life, I think, is very remarkable. And this quality of life effect was persistent for when they followed patients 6 months to a year later. Those who continued to exercise had that continued improvement in quality of life. And here's just a graph showing that the patients who were previously having an increase of 40 to 50 beats per minute of heart rate when they were standing up, now after exercising, we're only having about a 20 heart rate increase upon standing. So a really big drop in this heart rate surge when standing, which shows that their POTS symptom, or that their physiologic, POTS signs were getting better. And another study that Dr. Levine did showed that when you exercise, it increases blood volume and increases heart mass. So like what we were talking about previously. And in this study, they also showed an improvement of quality of life in all of the patients in the study. And half of the patients no longer met POTS criteria after going through the training. Another study from his group showed that for people who were exercise training, it improved their physical fitness and their cardiovascular response to exercise, which basically means that people who started exercising, who were able to ramp up their exercise through this program, were then able to exercise better and more efficiently after going through it. So their body was actually able to handle exercise well afterwards. And so as hard as it is to start and to ramp yourself up to that place, once they had completed those initial steps of ramping up their exercise, their body was much better adapted to continuing to exercise afterwards. And another study from his group compared exercise to propranolol, which is a beta blocker that patients with POTS very commonly take. And it showed that exercise is actually better than this beta blocker treatment in changing the vital signs when patients were standing up, in normalizing the renal adrenal responsiveness, which is that fight or flight symptoms that we were talking about in the previous session, and improving quality of life. So exercise is, better than a pill that we can take. But, with all that said, so why don't everyone with POTS just exercise and get better? It's not that simple, right? And I think everyone who's watching here has probably had a lot of challenges with learning to exercise in their life again. And it's hard because when you start, you are so deconditioned, and it takes a lot of time, a lot of patience, a lot of effort, a lot of frustration to build up that strength and that cardiovascular reserve over time. And, exercise is going to feel really bad before it starts feeling good. And you're not going to necessarily see an improvement day to day or even week to week. Often it takes months of sustained effort, of feeling frustrated, to actually notice results. And as with everything with POTS, some days are going to be better than others. Some days, exercise is going to come easier and you're able to do more and feel better. And some days it's really going to be a struggle. But it's important to just kind of keep going no matter where you are that day. So especially when you begin exercising, expect to feel very, very fatigued and symptomatic after exercising. So trying to build it into a routine in your day where you can rest after you exercise. But I think one of the most important things to remember is that your body can do it, as hard and as frustrating as it is, that you just have to believe in your body's ability to heal itself through exercise and build that up slowly over time. So how to get started? I think, what exercise is going to look like is going to be different for every person, because where they're starting from is going to be different for every person. You want to find your own personal sweet spot where you're pushing yourself, but you're not overdoing it so much that you're then setting yourself back days and days at a time. That while it might make you feel a little bit worse, you don't want it to put you so far backwards that you do a big exercise session on the day that you feel good and then are totally bedbound for 7 days. So it's going to take some experimentation. It might take some times of overdoing it to realize exactly where that place is for you, where you're pushing yourself, but it's not too much for you. And what that sweet spot is going to change for you over time. And where you're going to start depends on where you're coming from. So someone who's bedridden, has been bedridden for a long time, is going to be starting from a different place than someone who is otherwise working full time or going to school. But I think the most important thing with exercise is to remember what you're working towards. What is the thing that POTS makes it hard to do that you want to be able to do again, and how can exercise help you get there? So some tips and tricks for exercising. Compression socks, which we'll talk about in our 4th session, can be really helpful to wear during exercise to keep blood from pooling in those extremities while you're exercising. Hydration and salt are key, and important to hydrate not just while you're exercising, but actually beforehand. So trying to get that hydration and salt into you earlier in the day so that you're well hydrated to begin your exercise, and then continuing to hydrate and have salt while you exercise. Beginning with reclining exercises where you're lying down and then building up slowly to standing exercises. And being consistent. And so trying to exercise as many days a week as possible. If you can do 5 days a week, if you can do 7 days a week, just really trying to make it part of your every single day routine, just like having salt, drinking your water, or putting on your compression socks. Exercise is something that someone with POTS should be trying to build into their routine every single day. And avoiding the heat is really important. So if you live somewhere that's hot, or if it's the summer, probably doesn't make sense to try to go for a bike ride or a run outside, because that's going to make it a lot harder to exercise. And so trying to find a cool place to exercise so that your body isn't working against that additional challenge. So if you're someone who is bedridden and is currently not able to do kind of any standing exercises, there are things that you certainly can do from lying down. So here are some examples of some exercises, such as hip bridges, where you just lift your hips off of the ground while your feet are down, bringing your knees up towards your chest, lying on your belly and doing these Superman positions. And if you're able to sit up in a chair and have some resistance bands, trying to build some strength in the legs and arms. You can also do this no resistance bicycle, where you just pedal around on that to start getting just blood flow back through your body, even if there is no resistance in it. And the key is to do whatever you can and to not give up. Slow and steady progress is the most important thing. If it's 1 minute a day, that's better than 0 minutes a day. And maybe it goes from 1 minute a day to 2 minutes a day to 2 minutes 3 times a day. And that's how you build progress over time. So here's a list of things that you can do if you are bedridden. So one of them is having a pillow between your legs and squeezing it, holding it for 10 seconds, releasing, and then repeating. You can also put a pillow in between your arms and squeeze it together as well. Alphabet toes is lying in bed and trying to use your toes to draw the letters of the alphabet, and trying to build up as many letters as you can, seeing if you can get through the whole alphabet. Another one is leg lifts on your side. So laying on your side and lifting your leg up and then bringing it back down. Front leg lifts, where you lie on your back and lift one or both legs up towards the ceiling and then bring it down. And then stretching in general can really just help move blood around the body and take stress off of joints, because you can get really stiff joints if you are sitting or laying down for long periods of time. Moving past that, so then you want to move on to horizontal exercise. And so per the Levine-Dallas protocol, months 1 through 4 of exercise when you're first beginning should all be in a horizontal position. So that can be in a recumbent bike, where your body is fully supported to be kind of leaning back while you bicycle, using a rowing machine, or swimming laps in a pool. So all of these things make it so that your body doesn't have to both fight gravity and exercise. It's just about building up that exercise. And so the Levine-Dallas protocol really focuses on tracking your heart rate and using heart rate as well as rating of perceived exertion, which is how difficult it feels to you. And so you use these two metrics together to figure out what zone you're in, and he has a very specific plan that says what zone you should be in and for how long. It's also really important to warm up and cool down. So you're not going to want to go right into the race pace. You're going to want to give yourself a little bit of time to warm up, get your heart rate gradually up to where you want it to be. And strength training is also really important. So building up that muscle mass throughout your body is really important for increasing the ability of your body to circulate blood well and to fight gravity. And so you want to do 20 to 30 minutes of strength training twice a week, whether that's using your own body weight or using seated exercise equipments with separate weights. Particularly important to focus on the lower body, so the legs as well as the core, because that is the most important areas to strengthen, to build muscle, which allows the blood to more effectively return to the heart. So examples of some strength training is a lot of the same exercises that are the lying down exercises, things such as bridges, seated ball exercises, straight leg raises, side lying leg raises, and crunches. So this is from the website of the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia with the Levine-Dallas protocol. And so I'll put the link on the screen for where to find this. But this just shows kind of what, if you're starting out on month 1, ideally your exercise training would be. And whether this ends up being month 1 or month 4, because you have to build yourself up to get to this month, then that's okay. But this, I think, is great because it's a very specific guide for how to build up your exercise over time. And so this one, for example, on your first day when you're doing your day of cardio, you want to do 5 to 10 minutes of warm-up, 3 minutes at base pace, so kind of building up, 2 minutes of recovery where you slow down, let your heart rate come down, do another 3 minutes at base pace, and then cool down. So if you're warming up and cooling down for 10 minutes, and then you're doing really 6 minutes at base pace. And so it shows that, you know, it's just a few minutes of exercise to start with that is really key. And he has these guides for many months, and you can see how over time you're going to increase the number of minutes that you're exercising. So by the end of the month, you're doing 12 minutes at base pace rather than 6. But it is that slow and gradual ramp up. And then there are 2 days a week of strength training in there as well. And so I put into this example just so you can see what it looks like. So month 3, for example, you're starting to build up a lot more, doing 30 minutes at base pace, and doing a lot more minutes of exercise as your body becomes able to do so. And by month 8, you're up to an hour at base pace. And so, you know, it allows you kind of to slowly and steadily build yourself up to where you need to be, because, you know, most people, if they're going through this exercise protocol, aren't in a place where they can do an hour at base pace to begin with. It takes months and months to get there. But it's about being persistent, kind of staying with this exercise protocol, committing yourself to exercise, and knowing that you will get there eventually. So exercise, although it's so frustrating in the beginning, really is something that for people with POTS has to be a lifelong commitment. And although it won't feel this way at first, it can really become a lifelong joy. And so if you feel better after 3 months, so it really takes a full 3 months to notice any effects, then keep going. There are so many benefits to exercise that kind of overall functioning ability to participate in daily life is going to increase. Less fatigue, more stamina, better sleep, improved mood, improved self-confidence, and more. And it should be part of your daily routine, like eating breakfast. And as your stamina improves, you can find exercises that you truly enjoy, things like cycling, Pilates, yoga, running, hiking, tennis, soccer. If those things feel like crazy things that you wouldn't be able to do now, after a year or 2 years of consistent exercise, this might be something that's available to you. There are POTS patients who are running marathons out there, and that might not be something that makes sense for you, but after years of exercise, there are POTS patients who have built themselves up to this place, and consistency is key. The other thing that happens sometimes is that little setbacks, like getting a cold or getting some other virus, can really set you back. And so it might be that you were on the equivalent of month 8 of the Levine protocol, and all of a sudden you're back to month 3. And you might have to work yourself back up to that place. And it is really frustrating, but that is kind of what happens with POTS, that you have to just be committed to performing exercise. And I'll say, so here are the links for the resources I use to make this PowerPoint. So Dysautonomia International, which is a really useful POTS website, has an exercise page I think is really helpful, that a lot of this material came from. And then the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, CHOP, has the modified Dallas POTS exercise program as a PDF that's really extensive and explains everything you need to go through. So for people looking for that protocol, I would highly recommend looking for that PDF. So I will stop screen share. Let's see.
That's great. So Jessica, this is such a nice overview of exercise, and there are a lot of comments in the chat about people who have tried and failed to exercise because they find it causes a flare. So it's 1 day of exercise and 2 days or 3 days of feeling terrible. And you've made the point, and I want to stress the point again, that if that happens, it doesn't mean you can never exercise. It means that what you did was too much for you at that time, and to take tiny baby steps, because you're not comparing yourself to your roommate, and you're not comparing yourself to where you might have been 10 years ago when you were a high school athlete? Because truly, POTS affects a lot of former athletes who are used to getting up and going for a run and then working out a little bit and then, you know, going out to a party. That is not the situation anymore. And so if you compare yourself to somebody like your former self before you got sick, or someone who's completely healthy, you're going to constantly come up short and feel like a failure. What you want to do is start where you are, and wherever you are is where you're starting. And your goal, as you pointed out, is to take baby steps forward and not try to suddenly go back to where you wish you were or were once or want to be. It doesn't happen like that, right? But
Yeah,
let me ask you a question. How did you do this? Did you just go online and look at a protocol, or did you have a physical therapist or a trainer or someone to walk you through it? Because it looks like a lot to just sort of read that and do it on your own.
yeah. So I was diagnosed with POTS over 10 years ago, and so these resources didn't exist to my knowledge at that time. But my dad had found a podcast from the Mayo Clinic that was really just saying exercise is the key, exercise, exercise, exercise. And so we just started trying to implement that in my life in those baby steps. And I've been there so many times where I was like, I'm feeling great today. Let me take, you know, like a walk around my whole neighborhood, and then felt awful and went backwards and felt like I had erased all this progress that I had made. And so for me, when I was originally bedbound, it was about those really small steps. It was about just lying in bed and trying to just move my legs around, trying to just move my arms around, trying to be able to walk from my bedroom down the hallway, and then eventually, you know, maybe 3 weeks later, being able to walk from my bedroom down the stairs. And then it was walking from, you know, my house out into the driveway, and then from the driveway to the end of the street. And then there were certain times where I had been walking further, and then that day it just wasn't happening, and having to give myself patience and grace. But I have to say that, you know, after doing this for years and years and years, I think my exercise capacity is so much more than I ever would have thought possible back then. So at this point, I'm able to go to, you know, cycling spin classes and spend an hour, you know, really ramping my heart rate up, or go to a hot yoga class. And that's not something I would have ever imagined possible, and not something that I would recommend if you're not in this place of really gradually building up. But kind of funnily enough, what actually made a big difference for me was that because I had missed many months of class when I was in high school, they made me do summer makeup gym in person. And so they were like, here is a bike, just sit on this bike and like bike for 15 minutes a day. And doing that and then slowly building myself up, I noticed how much better I felt over that 3-month period where I was just forced to be exercising. And it became a lifelong thing for me, that no matter how busy I've been in med school, no matter how many hours of sleep that I have that is not enough for me, exercise is still something that, if it means waking up at 4:30 in the morning before I have to go to rounds, it means waking up at 4:30 in the morning. And it's that important to me, and has been that important to my journey.
How do you mentioned the importance of wearing compression when you're exercising, and salt. Can you tell us a little bit specifically about compression and salt, timing of your salt before exercise? How do you do that?
Yes, I think it's really important to make sure that you're hydrated going into exercise, particularly as you're building yourself up. And so not having salt and water after exercising, not even having it during exercise. You want to go into it well hydrated. You want your body to be in that optimal state when you're going in. So trying to hydrate and have had something to eat earlier in the day so that you're in a good place when you start. You don't want to be starting with an empty tank, because then you're really just going to bottom out quickly. In terms of compression, I think there is a sweet spot that's hard, because I think compression that's really high compression can actually make exercise harder, because I've had it where if I'm exercising with really high compression stockings, it actually starts hurting my legs because I feel like I'm not getting the blood flow to them that I need to be able to exercise. So that can kind of just be a trial and error, that what is right for you, and that certain exercises may need compression more than others. If you're doing reclining exercise, compression may or may not be useful to you, but it's something just to try and see what works best.
Great. Yeah, and I think that physiologically, salt an hour before exercise, salt and water an hour before. Dr. Kelly Hedgepeth, I want to introduce Dr. Kelly Hedgepeth, who's joined us She was seeing patients, and it looks like you have a question for us.
Oh, hi, everybody. I'm sorry I joined late, and I just wanted to jump in here because, Jessica, that's such empowering discussion. I think just hearing your story, I think, is so inspirational. So thank you for sharing. I know when a lot of patients come to me and they are thinking about, you know, how they can get better, and we start talking about exercise, we kind of have to do a lot of planning and guidance kind of leading up to integrating it in. And I just didn't want that to maybe be lost here, because to be understanding symptoms before launching to a, because you don't want the person to end up setting you, you know, even further, kind of and understanding depression and the role, being able to tease out when you're having a day and a bad day, I think are really important components of being integrate in the exercise. So if you want to say a few more words about that story, but I think it's important to just to have kind of that foundation right before you.
Yeah. So you were breaking up a little bit. I don't know if other people could hear you speaking, but Jessica, did you want to address that at all? But just the fact that I think for people who couldn't hear what you were saying, I think you're saying it's not the time to start exercising when everything else is unstable. Get everything stable and then begin the exercise. But it is a vicious cycle. The cardiac atrophy, which is also a shrinking, not just a weakening of the heart muscle, but a shrinking, a physical shrinking of the heart. It's been called the Grinch syndrome because if anyone has seen The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, the heart, which is 3 sizes too small, if you don't use it, you lose it, right? So if you're not using your heart, you're not exercising, the heart is used to pumping blood through the circuit. And if it's disused and laying in bed and laying flat, it does literally physically shrink. And so what you need to do is expand your volume with salt and water, and then expand the return of blood to the heart through exercise. Jessica, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would just say that I think Dr. Kelly Hedgepeth's point is really important, though, that I saw in the comments that some people were saying that, you know, I have this other disease that makes me unable to exercise and my physician says I can't exercise. If that's you and your body, you need to follow that. You need to listen to that physician. So this is certainly not a one-size-fits-all recommendation. Just like some people can't have salt, some people can't wear compression, some people can't use different medications. And so it's so important to trust your own body, and that this is not something that's going to work for everyone, but for people that it is able to work with, who are able to kind of understand their symptoms in their body and are able to build themselves up slowly over time and recognize where is that pushing yourself without overdoing it place, it can be really, really helpful.
Yes, great. There's a question in the chat about why recumbent exercise. Why do you have to recline and do flat exercise? So I do want to say a word about that, and people can please feel free to chime in. If you're somebody who's finding it really hard to walk, that's partly because you're exercising, which is something new for your body and your muscles are weak, and you're upright at the same time. And remember, we talked last week about gravity being really an enemy of a P.O.T.S warrior, because in gravity, the blood is pooling in your veins down below your waist, and the blood has to travel up against gravity to your heart and keep going up to your brain. And so when you don't have enough volume in your circulation to begin with, and then you stand up, there's less of it to go around. And then on top of that, you're diverting blood to your muscles, and there's less of it yet to get to your brain. And so sometimes when people have not enough salt and water, either because they can't or they haven't, not enough compression either because they can't or they haven't, and they're deconditioned, and they stand up, and they start exercising, it's kind of a triple whammy, and it's a recipe for feeling terrible and exhausted and having a setback. So that's why we recommend for people who can do it, first the salt and water, then the compression, and then start exercising recumbent so that you can work on the muscle strength and the circulating the blood within your body without adding the insult of being upright in gravity on top of all that. Once you get that under control, so that could be a recumbent bike, it could be the exercises Jessica showed you, swimming, all those things are recumbent. and you get really comfortable with that, then you go upright and start to do the same thing. But the compression also, I just want to say one quick word. We're going to talk more about compression next time, but the compression recently has come out as there was a recent study that showed that the compression of the gut and the pelvic veins is even more important than compression of the lower legs. So some people will wear calf sleeves or compression sleeves that cover the lower part of the leg only because that's the easiest to get on. But if you can, wear the type that's like a bike short or Spanx that is waist down to the thighs. So if you had to choose the compression of the gut and the pelvis, those veins get compressed in, helps return the blood up to the heart. That's where the money is in terms of POTS. It's been shown to really help that change in heart rate when you stand up. Okay.
I have a question. So a lot of times people ask in the group, you know, what's the best exercise? And you guys are going over all the recumbent exercises. And a lot of doctors do recommend swimming. And we do a point of trying to educate on swimming and how it kind of acts as like a compression even itself. But some people get concerned about, you know, if I'm in a pool, what happened if they were to start feeling symptomatic, obviously stop. Do you guys still do you recommend swimming as a therapy, or are you more of the recumbent bikes and exercise bikes recumbently?
Swimming is a fantastic exercise. So as you point out, it's not just that you're supine or flat, which in itself is really good. You don't have to be on your back. You just have to be flat so that your head isn't so much higher than your legs. So swimming for that reason is great. And then you're exactly right. The pressure of the water kind of acts like compression socks. So it pushes the blood into the deeper veins, especially if it's cool-ish water and not too warm. That in itself helps the blood circulation. You do have to be careful, not so much during swimming. I've never had a patient who had a problem during swimming, but when you get out of the pool and you suddenly go from being flat to being upright, you want to definitely don't swim by yourself. Have somebody around. Let them know that at least the first few times this might be new for you, and make sure somebody's there to help you get out of the pool, because that can be kind of tricky. Anyone left?
And as
Another
side note for people that, sorry, as a side note for people that say they don't have access to a pool, which I know some areas it's not very common. If you live in Florida, I think it's very common, but for other regions, another resource, and I have found this out through different groups, if you ask a chain of hotel or a hotel that you know has a pool and you tell them you need it for a medical reason, a lot of times they'll let you use it. I mean, as long as it's not super busy. And I don't know about how this has happened or been affected through COVID, but I know people, when I've shared that prior, they're like, oh my God, I never thought of that. So, you know, using that resource, if a pool is not readily available, or it's even not even, you know, it's going to cost you a lot of money to go somewhere and get that exercise. If swimming is something you'd like to do, it's highly recommended. So, and generally it's the same thing for anybody. If you're going to stick to what you like to do. I mean, if you like swimming, sticking to it, and you know you're going to continue doing it, finding something that makes you want to continue is one thing, but having POTS on top of that is even more important that we like what we're doing. So I had one more question come in via text. I don't know if they're on the call or not. Can you guys explain why? Okay, so oftentimes it seems like people will just say that they got immediately struck with dysautonomia or POTS, or the symptoms came on suddenly, but they were healthy, active prior to POTS. So why do we see that with that population? We think that those would be the people that bounce back the quickest, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're the ones that actually it takes longer for them to recover.
Yeah. That's a great question. It does seem to be disproportionately affecting POTS, disproportionately affects people who had previously been quite athletic. I don't know that that's been scientifically proven, but certainly in my experience, a lot of former high school athletes, even college athletes, who then get POTS. I think part of the problem is psychologically, it's just so jarring and so shocking and disappointing. And people, after being sick, usually with some type of triggering illness, either COVID, flu, mono, whatever, think they can jump right back to their former state. And it's really difficult to do that. I don't think there's anything specific about having been athletic that sets you up to be really sicker than anyone else. It's just that it's much more frustrating for former athletes to be feeling like a little kitten than it is for someone who's always been sort of a couch potato. The only thing I'd say is that former concussions can cause kind of a pile on with POTS, and so a lot of former athletes have had concussions. But otherwise, I think it's just the contrast in having been so active and then not being. One quick word about COVID and pools is that when people go to a pool now, because of the pandemic and risk of exposure, you want to get changed beforehand. Don't go through the locker room. Don't change in the locker room. Go straight to the pool, swim, come out, and go home and take your shower at home, because the swimming itself appears to be very safe and very low risk for transmission or picking up COVID. It's the locker room that's the problem.
Dr. Lee Lewis and Kelly Hedgepeth, I wanted to ask you about your opinion about referring patients to physical therapy or kind of other resources that they can use to start building up this exercise in a supervised way.
Yeah. Allison, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I've been afraid to talk because my internet is spotty. I think, situations, and I see a lot of in that where people are saying, God, I feel and this isn't working for me. Uh-oh, I see faces.
Yeah, you're still breaking up. I don't know why.
I'm not
and I'll
sure.
translate because I think I know what you're saying.
Okay, but I think in those situations where it seems like you're hitting a wall and not making progress, that having a professional, whether really educated personal trainer or a physical therapist that has experience, is really critical to making progress. So yes. Hopefully hear that. Yes. Dara, you could chime in.
No, that's exactly right. Not everybody needs to have a physical therapist to do this. So if you feel like you're game to give it a shot and you can follow those protocols and look at the pictures and there's YouTubes, great. And if that works, great. But if you have specific problems like Ehlers-Danlos in particular, people have a lot of joint vulnerabilities, or people who have cervical cranial instability, and someone had said in the chat when they do neck stretches, they feel like they're going to pass out. There are certain neck instability situations and joint hypermobility where people dislocate their joints. For those people, I really recommend a personal trainer who is specifically versed in working with people who have these problems. Otherwise, if you've been previously athletic, you kind of know your body, you kind of know how these things work, and you feel comfortable, you could certainly give it a try without a professional. But if you have access to it and insurance covers it or whatever, always nice to have somebody walking you through.
There's also some questions about POTS post-COVID too. And I think there's much about COVID that we don't fully understand. So the recommendations are full 2 weeks of no exercise following COVID infection, and then very gradual increase of activity. So if you're someone that had significant symptoms with COVID and are still having symptoms, you do not want to be launching on an exercise program. You really want to let your body recover, lay low, just, listen to your symptoms and take that time off for recovery before, feel like you're at a baseline before you start exercise.
Yes, thank you. That's such an important point, because there are some people with COVID who have inflammation of the heart muscle. It's rare, but it happens. And there are other viruses besides COVID that can cause inflammation around the heart muscle. That is exactly not the time to exercise. You can actually do damage. And then some people had mentioned in the chat mitochondrial diseases. That just makes it physically almost impossible to exercise. So there are certain times where exercise is not the right thing. But if you have the okay from your doctor and you have recovered symptomatically from COVID, after you've recovered, then start much slower than you think you should. I always tell people, start about half where you think you should be. And if you feel good during it and you feel good afterwards, then after a week or so, you can start to creep up the amount. But holding people back from doing more is often a big challenge. And I love that everybody wants to go out there and push, but that is, as many of you have seen, often a setup for 2 steps forward, 3 steps back.
Jessica, I'm sorry, I came late to your presentation. It does seem there's a lot of questions about compression and wearing those during activity. I know we talked a little bit about, you know, the compression, but did you touch on what you do and what's worked well for you?
Yeah. So honestly, compression has not been a huge part of my exercising, but I know it is really significant and useful for other people. I think for me, the most important part was starting with those reclining exercises. So I really built myself up on a recumbent bike. Whereas I think if I had only had access to a machine, for example, that was an upright machine like an elliptical, I think compression would have been more key to my journey. But I think maybe it's something that in hindsight would have been helpful to me, but it was not something I'd done at the time. But I don't know if either of you have examples with patients that it's been really helpful for.
Well, I think this is a great example where that personal trial and error is really the key. And I hate to see people frustrated, you know, when really they need is to have their detective hat on, because it turns out that you are going to know your body much better than your doctors and your physical therapist. And so for you to make the connection about what's exacerbating your symptoms and what's helpful, I think you really should be empowered to make those, you know, connections. And if you're not feeling well, stop. I'm not feeling well, I'm going to take it easy. Really do the next step to think back about what's been going on and what might have triggered those symptoms. Because once you get a few good row under your belt, it's set up to then do more exercise and really see the gains from that. So I'll just, you know, mention that again.
Yes. Good. Yeah. So, well, we're nearing the end of the time. What I do want to wrap up and hit the high points of this, which is that everybody's starting where they're starting, and you've got to accept where you're starting and move from there, even if it's not where you were when you were at your healthiest, and even if it's not where someone your age ought to be. You're comparing yourself to yourself where you start today and see how you go over time. And every day is different, and the weather is going to be different, and what you eat and drink is going to be different. So listening to your body and tuning into your body is the #1 thing. Starting slower than you think, prepping your body with salt and water at least an hour before exercise, starting out supine, reclining, and following a protocol such as the one that Jessica showed us is really important. And then being aware that even though you may be making gradual, steady progress, there may be things that set you back, like an illness or some type of a flare. And you may, you know, sort of like that game Chutes and Ladders, where you might be making your way up and then boom, you start down and you got to start again at the bottom. And so be patient with yourself is probably the other take-home message. So be patient, but be steady and be persistent, because it really does pay off. I would say that I have had patients who did the salt, did the compression, got the meds, and it wasn't really, and those things all helped a lot, but it wasn't until they really started exercising and pushing through that they really started to break through with their POTS. And it's virtually impossible to get over POTS at all if you can't at least push through some of that exercise, because the exercise is what gets the heart to get back to a normal size and to start to tolerate the upright position and start to tolerate just even the activities of daily living. So I want to emphasize that. Any final words from either of you two?
I agree.
So before we wrap up, I wanted to, with my, you know, mod hat on, if anybody needs assistance getting compression stockings, I have this posted a few different places in the group. They can, depending on your insurance, be covered. I get 2 pairs a year covered through my insurance. So that's always another tip and trick that you learn along the way. So reach out. You'll obviously have to have a prescription. Then you usually go to a DME, durable medical equipment, or some pharmacies even have that section. And you could probably get 2 pairs covered. You need to make it sure it's very specific, like Dr. Dodara said, whether you want it just the sleeves or however your doctor wants it written, or if you have a preference, you can also tell the doctor, I heard that this is better than the other, one or the other. So just make sure the prescription is very specific. And then they'll actually go and they'll measure you, and hopefully, it's expensive to be sick. So when we can cut those costs any way we can, that's always a good thing. So I thank you guys so much for these presentations. I think they're wonderful. People are absolutely excited every time we do one. So I will let you guys wrap up, and we'll be on to the next one.
All right, 2 weeks from today, and we'll be talking about living with P.O.T.S. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, girls. Thank you.